Good morning, everyone. It is really early. It's still dark, even. This is the first time I've really talked this morning, too. Sorry about that. So I hope you're having a good Wednesday. We do need to go over a couple of pages today, probably not as long as we normally do, just because I want to, on Friday, be able to give you and let you have the big quiz and also kind of go over a PowerPoint that kind of sums up all the stuff that we've been looking at. I don't like to do PowerPoints while we're lecturing because I think it distracts from what we're doing, but I like to kind of do it, especially for the French Revolution, because I have a really cool one. Like it drips blood on the guillotine inside it. So, all right, we're on page 14. And when we ended yesterday, we were talking about Edmund Burke, and Edmund Burke is Edmund Burke is a British citizen who's writing about the French Revolution and saying it's a bad thing, it's going to end bad, it's going to end in a dictatorship, and he's writing that as kind of a message to the aristocracy in Great Britain, to the government of Great Britain, like, don't be thinking this is a good thing. This is not going to end well for France. We need to make sure that we're all on board with this is not good. And so this is where we're at. So we're ending that time period of the age of Montesquieu and makes sense. And we're now moving into the age of Robespierre. And the age of Robespierre begins rather abruptly because everyone in the National Assembly, all those middle-class enlightened thinkers whose goal was to get a constitution, now kind of say, okay, we did our thing and let's let someone else have a try. And typically that doesn't work well when you turn over the whole government. The United States has a series of elections in our House of Representatives. Every 2 years we're electing, every 2 years there's an election, and then people are rotated out, but always leaves a group of people that know how to do things, right? You don't always want brand new people, especially everyone to be brand new when you're running a country. And that's what happens. On the top of page 14, now we're going to move from the National Assembly to the Legislative Assembly. And the ways to think about that, to kind of keep it in your head, the National Assembly was about getting a national response and a constitution for everybody in France. The Legislative Assembly is now going to be about making laws. So that maybe helps you make sense in how the steps of that go along. So as it says, a completely new group of legislators, completely new. Members of the National Assembly had agreed that no one in their group would take part. Like, we're all going to stop. I still don't know why they thought that was a good thing. I have read lots of stuff about it, lots of books. I don't know why they thought that was a good thing, other than just stirring up new blood, but it just isn't a good thing. It never is a good thing. The new government reflected the emergence of political factions in the revolution competing for power. Most important were Republican groups. Now, we don't talk, this isn't a push, but I think it's really important to note that one of the most important speeches that in the history of the United States is George Washington's farewell address. And in George Washington's farewell address after his second duty as president, he warns of two things. One, entangling alliances, which is not important to us. But the second one is political parties. He warns that political parties are bad. Should have listened, but he did. And this is what's getting ready to happen in France. France had no political parties. We've talked about a little bit about political parties in Great Britain. We've got some Whigs and Tories, but not really like what we are getting ready to see in this time period in France. There's no political parties. We have not, and that's one of the things that makes early European history really nice, is we don't have to know all these political parties. There's not a whole bunch of them that you have to know. We're getting ready to have to do that. And when we do that, that's when stuff gets bad, because each of those political parties will be vying for power. And so When we look again at letter 1C, members were younger and less cautious. That's another problem. It shouldn't also be lost on you in our Constitution, and again, not U.S. history, but we have an age set on how old people need to be things. And it's definitely because there's an understanding that with age usually comes wisdom and cautiousness and thinking through your actions. And most of these people that are going to be in the Legislative Assembly lack those characteristics, and you will see that they really lack those characteristics. So we've got the Jacobins, named after their political club, came to dominate the Legislative Assembly. Now, these political clubs are just clubs. I don't know that we have anything really equivalent that I can compare to in the United States, but they're like clubs like the Moose or the Elks or Masons. It's that kind of a club, except it's all about politics, and they just talk about politics. The Gwydions is a group within the Jacobins that left or advanced the Party of Revolution and led the country into war. A lot of domestic problems. The nation becomes sharply polarized, economic and political chaos, because they don't know how to do these things. But what happens with these young men? That often happens with young men in power, and they want to beat their chest, and they're going to take France to war. Now, just note to self, when you're planning a revolution within your own country, it is not a good thing to then decide, let's just have war with everybody else, because that's a lot of stuff going on. That's a whole lot of stuff going on. And hopefully, my really smart, intuitive people, you can already tell that this is not going to end well. Well, we know it doesn't end well, but God, this hair is driving me nuts. That it isn't going to end well. And part of the problem is they're getting ready to go to war. Now, we have to remember who's the most powerful, and I want you to say it while we're listening, because I'm going to wait. Which country has always been the most powerful country in Europe? Yes. What country has always dominated Europe? Right. So, as now France is getting ready to make war on all these people, and it is not even a fraction of its powerful self, the rest of Europe sees this as a way to bring France down. Plain and simple. So on page 14, war was the main issue. War, war, war. So when you think about the Legislative Assembly, you should always be thinking about war. And the flip side of that is when they're thinking and making war, they're not really doing anything to advance the revolution. They're not doing anything to make France in the place where it needed to go and needed to be after the National Assembly did all these great things. So first thing they do is declare war on, let me start this over. So I got to take a backtrack. So what has happened as this revolution has begun? Lots of people are leaving France, and in particular, the nobility. They see what's happening. They're going to go away. They're going to go to see relatives. They're going to go to countries that are sympathetic and perhaps raise armies and come back and knock these people down. That's their goal. They're called émigrés, meaning they immigrate to somewhere else. That's the French word, I think, for immigrate, but they're called émigrés. So the Legislative Assembly makes a note of that and takes that as a threat, which they were right to do so. They took it as a threat. And they issued the Declaration of Pillants, and they send it to both Prussia and Austria. And what they say to those émigrés, again, there's our definition, French nobles who fled France in 1789, influenced Prussia and Austria to declare the restoration of the French monarchy as their goal. And so this issuing says, you guys have to return France back to the king. This is not something you can do. You have to put the king back on the throne. The Austrian Emperor Leopold would be willing to take military steps to restore order, and the Declaration of Pillants was really a bluff. Like Austria and Prussia were not going to go to war, but France takes that as yes. So on the top of page 15, the Legislative Assembly declares war on Austria in April 1792. Also should not be lost on you to remember that Marie Antoinette is Austrian, right? They have never liked her, and it is always in the best interest of France to have a weakened Austrian Habsburg Empire. Again, anti-Austrian, and we begin war. And this is the war of the first coalition. And the coalition is everybody who wants to beat up France just joins in, like, yeah, let's take France down. So the war of the first coalition, and that coalition is a group of people that are going to fight against France. The French revolutionary forces were soundly defeated, and that should not be a surprise. Most of the army of France was run by the nobility. They all left. All the officers left. They don't have anybody that can lead them. So it isn't too stretch of imagination to understand why they lost. Only conflict between Eastern monarchs over the division of Poland intensified existing unrest and dissatisfaction. And this is the big one. On page 15, you need to put a box around D, that one that's kind of offset. The Jacobins blamed their defeat on Louis XVI. Not the fact that they didn't have strategy, not the fact that they didn't know how to run an army, not the fact that they were in the middle of a revolution and it's really hard to have a war against someone else when you're really kind of at war within your own country. They blamed Louis. And what did they say? That Louis was conspiring with Austria. Now, was he? Probably so. Was he effective? Probably not. Right? Because he was then under house arrest, and there wasn't a lot of ways that he could get information out. But he certainly was writing letters. He certainly was sending everything he could to people trying to get help. That is going to be the beginnings of him getting his head cut off, because they are going to say or convict him of treason. So, July 25th, the Brunswick Manifesto. I always have a hard time with this one because in North Carolina, we don't call it like beef stew like everybody else does. We call it Brunswick stew. It makes me hungry every time I come to talk with it. It makes me wish for some good old Brunswick stew. I love Brunswick stew. The Brunswick Manifesto is issued by Prussia and Austria and threatened to destroy Paris if, again, the royal family is harmed. Now, this time we're just stretching it to the royal family. And again, we have to remember that these time periods, that the royal family is anointed by God. They are divinely given the right to rule. And secondary is, if the king of Paris can go down, what does that mean for the rest of the nobility in Europe? That is really important. That's one of the things that Edmund Burke is writing about. Like, you guys cannot let this happen. If it does, all the dominoes are going to fall. We're going to have unrest across Europe. So, in response to the Brunswick Manifesto, the Jacobins incited mobs in Paris. Revolutionary sentiment was stoked by Robespierre, and these three names you need to know: Robespierre, Danton, and Marat. All men. I think Marat is Jean, or it looks like Jean, but it's Jean. And those three men are going to rule the revolution during this time period. And they're young. They are all attorneys, and they are very much revolutionaries in the sense that they are not afraid to shed blood. August 10th, in Tuileries, the king's palace was stormed. The king's taken as prisoner, and then again, he is prisoner, held by the revolutionaries of the Legislative Assembly, which is not going to be a good thing for him. Swiss guards are defeated, and this marks the beginning of the Second Revolution. And the Paris Commune, which comes up first, the revolutionary municipal government set up in Paris, which effectively usurped the power of the Legislative Assembly. So now the Legislative Assembly is not in control. The city of Paris is in control. And this is what Robespierre, Danton, and Marat are working towards, that Paris becomes the center of the revolution, not the government. And this is going to be led by Georges Jacques Danton. And he will suspend the Legislative Assembly suspend the Constitution. This is one of the things that's interesting about France. At this point, I think by the 21st century, they've had 9 constitutions because they just throw them out and get another one. Ordered new elections, and France is now on a different road. In the middle of all this, on the top of page 16, we're looking again for places where normal people jump off the crazy train and say, this is enough. We're not doing anything with this anymore. On the top of page 16, you need to really draw attention in your notes to the September massacres because they're really important. The September massacres are going to be led by this Paris Commune, by these groups of young revolutionary men. And there's 2 things that they think are happening, which may or may not have been true. Probably a lot true. But rumors are starting to spread that all these people that they have in prison, and we haven't really talked about that in our notes or really discussed that. They've put a lot of people in prison. They've put nobility in prison, all of the clergy that would not take the oath of to the civil constitution, and the clergy take their oath to France instead of to the Pope, that half of those priests that would do that, they're in jail. They're in prison. And there are lots of other people in prison. And the rumor becomes that all those people in prison, that they put all in one spot so they can conspire, and that's what they're doing. They're conspiring to overthrow that group of people, and they're plotting with foreign invaders. In other words, they're supplying them with information. They're giving them information that will help them overthrow their revolutionary government. And as a result of that, it inflames these young men. And remember when I said this is why we don't do this and allow and have an age on all of our elected why we have an age on all of our elected officials in the United States, recognizing with wisdom, with age comes some wisdom most of the time. So 4B, mobs slaughter over 1,000 priests. 1,000 priests. Bourgeoisie, and aristocrats who opposed their program. And many of these were just sitting in prison. They weren't actively working towards overthrowing it. They were in prison. And this September massacres is one of the things that causes many people to jump ship. When we're in APUSH next year, this is what causes people in the United States to jump ship. They're out. They're like, nope, we are no longer supporting that French Revolution, except Thomas Jefferson. But everybody else says, no, that is a step too far. You don't murder people in prison. They're in prison. You have control of them, especially priests. And the September massacres are the fork in the road of when we make this jump off of the train. And if you remember when we were just talking about and discussing the Crane's Anatomy worksheet, and I drew a bend, like where the train starts to come back, this is where the train begins the bend, where normal people say, that is not anything that I thought this revolution was going to be about. Murdering priests in prison, that's not it. And so this will be where we start that bend in our train ride back to a dictator named Napoleon. All right, so don't forget to take your quiz today. The secret code for the quiz is the city of Paris, P-A-R-I-S. Make sure you capitalize the P because it is a proper noun. I hope you have a great rest of your day. Don't forget to check in with all of your other classes and let me know if you have any questions. I do have some students coming in to get help today, so if it takes me a few minutes to get back to your email, that's why I'm working with other students. And I should throw that out to you guys. I know some of you, it's not so easy to get here on Wednesday because you don't have rides or cars, but if any of you would ever like to come in and have a little one-on-one with your DBQ or SAQs or anything, I'm here. You do have to let me know the time because we don't just let students in the building. So anyway, have a great Wednesday. We'll see you back here on Thursday, and be nice and kind to each other.